to the attendance. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Make sure that you go into the chat room and sign up for your attendance. Also, if you'll please make sure that your attendance for the last couple of weeks is accurate, we'd appreciate that. Okay, to start us out today, we need approval of the minutes. So I hope you've had a chance to look over those from our last meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from last week?
So moved, Sandy.
Thank you, Marshall. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. So minutes for last week are approved. Just a quick reminder of our purpose, which is to advise the superintendent on the safe reopening and continued operation of schools during this pandemic. And we have quite a task ahead of us in doing that. It seems like it becomes a little more complicated every day. It's like we're trying to look in a crystal ball and figure out what's going to happen in August. So we really appreciate you helping us with this work. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Atkins for a brief welcome, and I will stop sharing so that you're able to see him. Dr. Atkins.
All right, thank you, Cindy. And again, I just echo that sentiment. I just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening this afternoon, I should say, for this important task force. Your input is going to be really critical in our decision making as we look forward to the fall, where we hope to make some very key decisions relative to how we're going to reopen our schools and continue our education for our kids. But we have to, of course, provide that high quality learning environment under the safest circumstances that we possibly can. So this is a dynamic situation, as you all know. Since we last met, we had the governor's plan that was released, and we've also seen an uptick in in our COVID cases here locally. So these are two factors that have changed just in the short period of time between our meetings. So those are good examples of how we have to be very agile in our decision making, because we have a lot of decisions that we need to make prior to the start of school in the fall. So I do want to turn to the governor's plan briefly. And one thing about the governor's plan that I think is very, very important for everybody here to understand is that the governor's plan, if you look at it, stresses local control. So that means these decisions are going to be made locally. I will say as a superintendent that I was happy to see that this document was put out by the Department of Education, because it does provide us with a lot of good guidance, things to think about as we are planning to reopen in the fall. But how that reopening is going to occur, it really sets out what a lot of those decisions that have to be made, what we should be thinking about. So I think it does provide us really good governance. But this is a local decision. One of a couple of the things that the chancellor, or I should say the commissioner, was stressing, Commissioner Corcoran, and the governor, closing the achievement gap is absolutely critical, because I think in this time of distance learning that achievement gap concern that we have has actually been exacerbated. So closing the achievement gap is something that we really want to focus on as we look toward the fall, and also even our plans in the summer, but then also opening under really a healthy learning environment. So that's really what all these things are going to be key drivers as we take on the responsibility as a local community of making decisions about what best meets the needs here in Lee County. I will say that our team here in the district office and some of our school-based folks have been literally working nonstop since we last met. They've been doing that to answer your questions relative to the models that were presented last time. refining those models. And that is something that we're going to spend a lot of time on this evening in a group discussion, because we're going to take a lot of time listening to you and taking your questions and getting your feedback relative to those models. The other thing that we are looking at is we want you to think about all the things that we have to consider. And so Dr. Spiro is going to kind of take you through, and his team, you know, a life in the day of a student as we see all the things that have to be considered from the moment that child gets up, gets ready to go to school, all the way to the moment where they are back at home. And then we feel that we have to make so many critical decisions that we're going to have to start breaking into smaller groups and really attack these different areas with some agility so that we can provide some good feedback to the overall group. I also want everybody to understand that this is something that providing a healthy learning environment is very important. And so there is, concerns. Some people that heard the governor's plan thought, well, this means full reopen no matter what. I said, no, that's not necessarily the case. What it means is that it's a local decision that I think the governor and the commissioner expect us to make, but make that in consultation with our health care professionals. I'm an education professional, but we have many professionals here in our community, healthcare professionals that I consider the experts in this area. So our local Department of Health, we have Lee Health and others, and I'm thankful that they're a part of this task force, because whatever decisions we make, they're going to have substantial impact on those decisions. So that's enough for my comments. I want to leave plenty of time for the team. So let's go right back to Cindy, and Cindy's going to facilitate a discussion on our models.
Thank you, Dr. Atkins. So you had some homework over the past week, and that was to go back and look at the reopening models that were explained last week, and also to look at the plan that the governor had sent out, so that today we could have some discussion around some of your concerns and some of the questions that you might have around that. So as we go into the discussion, just a few guidelines. If you will go to the participant area on your screens, usually down at the bottom, if you click on that, you have the option of raising your hand. So that'll put a little blue hand on the screen, and Lauren Stillwell is going to help us keep track of that so that we can take turns. And if you will please keep your comments to 2 minutes or less, that way we have a chance for everyone to speak. Then if we still have time, we'll do another round if you have something additional that you'd like to say. So with that, I'm going to open it up for discussion, and I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see a little better. All right. So at this time, questions, comments you have about the plan that was presented last week or the governor's plan that you reviewed. And the first hand I see is Amy McWilliam.
Hi, thank you. So I was able to speak with some of my neighbors. Some of them happen to be teachers. So I have a special teacher that I'm friends with in my community, and a middle school science teacher. But I also have lots of friends with children. One of the concerns was regarding the K-5 half-day plan. That was a big concern because most parents felt that what it would do is not necessarily, the children wouldn't necessarily go home. The children would go to a camp or a daycare, an aftercare situation, and possibly expose themselves to, or have more exposure, and bring that back to the classroom the next day. They also felt that the half-day model was very difficult when trying to plan a work schedule with their employer. So that was with the half-day. With the specials teacher, I let him know that he would have to have a cart or something with all of his art supplies and go to class, and he seemed a little bummed by that. But I have seen that in other schools, and I've seen it work. And then I had, what was the last comment? Oh, and then another teacher commented that her concern was with the alternating schedules and their own children, how is that going to work? Because they're going to have their children and their commitments to their child's learning and progress, as well as the classroom. and that needs to be taken into consideration as well. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me back up and say that while we're having the discussion, we are going to keep track of those questions and concerns that you bring up, because many of those will be addressed either in the presentation that's going to happen next when we're looking at the day in the life of a student, or will be discussed in more detail with the subcommittees over the next week. So if we don't stop and answer each question, then you understand that they're not being lost. Those are being kept track of, and we will come back to them. Okay, thank you. Okay, we have other members with discussion.
Cindy, Kevin Daley has his hand up.
Thank you. Yep, Mr. Daley. Mr. Daley, you're muted.
Oh, I unmuted myself. Anyway, I'll try to keep myself to 2 minutes, but so, you know, we got the plans and I put together some teams of teachers as well at different levels and, you know, had them look at them and beat them up. Really part of the issues here are, you know, especially with the hybrid plan, are a manageability issue. You know, the elementary plan revolves around the idea of kids staying in the same room all day and how they might get cabin feverish. You know, and I submitted kind of the findings to Lauren and Dr. Pruitt down there. And so it was kind of later in the day, but I think they have kind of the concerns from a lot of my constituency groups. And it really revolves around, you know, manageability, workload, things like that. And also, I feel like I have to say it, Dr. Atkins was right. Things have changed since last week. And you know, we haven't taken this group comfortably to meet in a room together yet because of social distancing concerns and COVID concerns. And, you know, many of these plans are putting, you know, thousands of children together in schools and thousands of employees together in schools. And we, as this 50-person group, haven't decided to get in. And really another issue I was thinking about, and maybe Trey can answer this one, is from the IT perspective. Do we have the bandwidth to put 6,000 teachers and, you know, 45,000 employees on Zoom or any other platform every day, all day, and have it be reliable? Because, you know, we talk about equity, and I don't think this pandemic has created a digital divide, but it's certainly brought the digital divide to the forefront. And you know, the students most in need, you know, of services, you know, do we have the ability to help them with Zoom, and do we have the IT kind of bandwidth? So, you know, my group is still working, and we're going to kind of wait on the committee assignments and kind of wait on the process to really share. But like I said, Ms. Stillwell and Dr. Pruitt kind of have our specific, you know, pluses and deltas, let's say, on the thing. So.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Lots of things to consider there. Scott Hertz is the next hand I see.
Good afternoon. I've shared some of the models and governor's plan with both folks I work with, some various other staff members actually of the district, different teachers and things. And I got back a lot of commonality in some of the questions and concerns that were raised. First, I want to say, out of at least the circle of people that I speak with and the responses I got when I share this information on Facebook, the overwhelming majority of people want to see everything reopen, and they want to see the children in school. People acknowledge the risks. Everybody is concerned about the risks, but they seem to feel that the disadvantages of a virtual only model, at least, are far outweighed by the benefits of being in person, as well as there is some limit to how long everybody can live in their houses and not be physically present with other people. So that's primary. And of course, as everybody says, the situation is fluid. Things are changing. Numbers are increasing. So that may change as we get closer to the opening. But I did want to put that out there first. And then that dovetails nicely, actually, with a lot of the other concerns that were raised, which is about the practicality of children wearing masks, even up into middle school, as to whether it's just even, regardless of whether it's the best idea or it's an optimal practice, Question is, can you really get children 6th grade and below, maybe even 7th grade and below, or 8th grade and below to properly wear masks, not to touch the mask? You know, at what point does wearing the mask and the fact that people constantly are going to touch their face and adjust these things lead to more problems than it solves? At the same time, you know, I'll further say my family, we wear masks when we go out in public. We're abiding by those guidelines and trying to do those things. But it is concerning from that standpoint. The next thing that has been related to me, I've had multiple teachers raise the concern of the idea of being in the classroom all day with the children and having lunch with the children. How do those teachers ever get a break? B, how do they get to eat their own lunch? And how do they get planning time in periods? I know those are all issues that you have acknowledged and raised, but there are solutions. Plus, I have seen some work done by teachers who started analyzing how much space would be required. When you start to look at a classroom and they look at the social distancing that would be required, there's questions about how many children can fit in the classroom. If you're going to move through a hallway, it is my understanding in a number of our schools that have entirely interior hallways, it would take the entire length of a hallway from the exit door to the center junction to lay out an elementary school classroom, or let alone a middle school classroom, and maintain 6-foot distancing. So for that, one classroom requires the sole use of the entire hallway to traverse it and maintain that distancing. That's a way of saying that regardless of the guidelines, it's just not practical to move students through a school in that fashion. So that's that information, and as well as I think some concerns and questions I've seen portrayed too about the amount of time spent with hand washing, sanitizing. You know, our teachers were already struggling before any of this to fit in all of the required instruction, to meet all of their curriculum guidelines, requirements. Anything that takes away from that obviously makes that more difficult. And then meeting PE requirements and playtime requirements, recess, how do you get the children out to recess, or middle school, how do they get PE and how do they get those interactions? Those are all other concerns that were raised. And lastly, I'll throw in a tip. I've seen the concern raised by several folks as to how does a teacher maintain equality between children that are in a hybrid model. Theoretically, let's say where half the children are in class and half the children are virtual. The suggestion I would give there from some experiences I've had is you treat everyone as if it's online. The children in the classroom have the benefit of being there. They do get some personal interaction, but essentially they've got a better screen and camera than the people do at home when they're in the classroom. You would, just like we just did here, instead of raising my hand physically to ask a question, even the children in the classroom can use the online tools. They can be signed in. I've seen this done at the university level when you've got a room full of 100 students in a lecture. Everybody's got a laptop and they use the same virtual tools to ask questions or to raise their hand, whether or not they're present physically or present virtually. And something I would encourage the district to think about, and I know there's been a lot of consternation over the years about whether we teach cursive writing anymore, but as this goes on, I would encourage the district to think about how far down in the curriculum schedule or grade level they can push touch typing. As more and more students have to participate virtually, the way we ask questions in the chat and the way we use the chat tool, I think if we can encourage our students to improve their typing skills, that gives them the ability to ask questions and do those things virtually. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hertz. Lots of good suggestions there. So just from the list that you were mentioning, very many of those same concerns have come through in our Reopening Schools email box. So as you can see, the subcommittees are going to have quite a lot to consider as they go forward. Our next person is Crystal Vervat.
It's unmute.
I think she's trying to. It looks like
Okay.
she's trying to get it there. There you go. Appears to be unmuted, but we still can't hear you.
Okay, now, is it working?
There we go.
Okay, I just unmuted, so, okay. Yeah, so a lot of the parents that I spoke with in regards to what they want to see next year, and I don't even know if this is an option, but they want to go back to normal. They don't want masks. They don't want, yes, extra sanitation in the classroom may be helpful, but they don't want to go crazy with it. They just want to resume how it was last year. I know, like I said, the thing about the mask was a big concern for a lot of the parents that I spoke with. There were questions around CDC guidelines, and yes, they're guidelines, but are they actual rules that we have to follow or just kind of recommendations? So there were questions around that. I know parents have looked through a lot of the CDC guidelines and have concerns with what the CDC even stated on there. So I think, you know, in terms of feedback, that was kind of consensus of the people that I spoke with and what they wanted to see moving forward next year. So, yeah.
All right, thank you. The next hand is Joe Kemp Otero.
Right. I'll keep it very brief. Just wanted to share some concerns because I know many were sent to the reopening schools email. And I know that Kevin had shared other concerns from teachers with the TALP committees. Just some things to think about that some teachers that I have spoken to since last week's meeting, teachers are concerned about space in the classroom for proper social distancing. Although there's been talk of looking at blueprints and we have enough space, the reality is that when we do FSA testing, STAR testing, we can barely get kids 3 feet apart from each other. How are we going to do 6 feet apart from one another? Are we going to lose filing cabinets and teacher desks, things like that? So what would that look like? Another concern with the social distancing in the classroom is differentiated instruction. Will teachers still be able to have small group? If you have kids separated, that poses a new challenge where you really want to drill down and work with specific students on specific skills. The last thing that teachers have been concerned about, are we going to change protocols for when a child is sick? What I mean by that is sometimes a child isn't sent home until they throw up multiple times. It's not just like the first time, because it could be something that they ate didn't sit well with them. Are we going to reevaluate what is considered sick enough to go home? What's related to, you know, a possible COVID infection? So those are just some things that a lot of teachers do have concerns about right now.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. Brenda Clark.
Hi, I as well did speak to several parents and teachers in my neighborhood that I know, and one of the big concerns with the teachers was the, as addressed earlier, was the hybrid model and how they could possibly teach both and give fair treatment to both, even if, such as Mr. Hertz recommended, that they're all treated as they're virtual. The teacher said if they're, you know, always in the classroom and the specials are in the classroom and the lunch is in the classroom, she said, we have no time to make calls to parents, send emails, do grading. There's just no time in the day. And as the parents that I spoke to, it was kind of the same as Crystal had said, you know, masks were a big issue. Most had no issues with hand sanitation at all, or hand sanitizer and washing. But the interaction with kids and the masks was the big issue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good input there as well. Our next person is Heather Rodriguez-Wibbles.
Hi. When I was looking at, we were talking in a teacher small group, some of the concerns we had looking at options 3 and 4 go back to the simultaneous instruction. You have the ethical issues of students in the room that we shouldn't have on camera. How are we going to do this, like GoPro style? Either way, it's the same thing, not getting equal instruction to each group. And also there's a lot of cleaning issues too, like students bringing backpacks, everything with that. And will we be getting any paras to assist with this? Most schools just don't have the budget for it.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, budget is definitely going to be an issue with a lot of the safety precautions, and you know, the model will certainly have an impact. What model we choose will certainly have an impact on budget.
I had 2 more questions. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
One, how are we going to treat masks? Is that going to become a discipline issue? Are employees going to be required to wear masks the whole time? And second, are we considering, like St. Johns County, they've created a movable model, like depending on our risk level, going from regular school being like the green zone, and then if we have higher COVID numbers, going to a yellow or a red.
Thank you. Do you have any other comments? That's it. Okay, thank you. Just didn't want to cut you off. Okay, I see Mr. Daley's hand is back up. I know he's had a chance to talk but I do not see any other new hands. Is there anyone who wants to speak before I go back for a second round? Okay, see, there's another one. Dr. Atkins.
You can go ahead and get Kevin's. I was just going to respond overall to some of the questions.
Okay, Kevin.
Yeah, so, this has been a lot of good discussion, and I like some of the things that, everybody said, but again, I don't know if you guys know this, but we're doing high school football. And the coaches that are doing high school football as volunteers have had to sign waivers that they essentially waive their right to take any action against anybody if they get sick during football practice. And I, with all due respect to the community, I don't think my 6,000 teachers should have to sign a waiver about their health and their lives to do their job. I mean, we continue to see this data that almost leads us to an inevitable decision for now. And we, it seems like we want to modify what we're doing and what the rules are to fit the models. I mean, if I have to sign a waiver to go in and teach kids, and I'll invite anybody from the district who wants to put teachers to sign a waiver, to sign that waiver and get in the game too. I mean, again, this group hasn't met in person because we're concerned about getting together around COVID. And, so with all due respect to the parents, who I'm a parent too, I have a daughter at South, and I don't want her going back with 2,000 students a day, but I don't want her teachers having to risk their lives to teach my daughter. And so, I really think we need to think long and hard about whether we're making the right decision based on the data we've agreed to look at and consider, or whether we're making a decision and then finding the data to reinforce that decision. And so, that's kind of my thing today. And I understand kids have to go to school so parents can go back to work. I get all that, but I don't think my kindergarten teachers should have to possibly endanger their lives or give up their right to not catch COVID to keep their house in order so that one of the students' parents needs to go to school. And so, that's just kind of where I'm at right now.
Cindy, you're muted, Cindy.
Sorry, Dr. Atkins, we do have several other hands up. Do you want to respond now, or do you want to wait until you've heard their comments? Go ahead. Okay, thank you. All right, so then the next hand is Jamie Michael from SPALC.
Hi, my concern is I've read every one of those responses on the survey that was sent out from the district. We have a few people that do not want masks, don't want the kids wearing them, don't want the teachers wearing them. And then on the other hand, we have a large group of people that want them to wear masks, want them to social distance, want them to wash hands. And their concern is they're not going to get a backup from the school board or administrators to do those things, and they're going to be putting their health at risk, whether they're work in the classroom, whether they're the custodians. There needs to be a lot of training behind that, because we have people now that are not participating in social guideline, and they see nothing wrong with walking up and within 2 feet of talking to people in a work setting with no mask on, and we're going to start having increased numbers in the school district. The school district has done a wonderful job in keeping people healthy, keeping them working, but it's going to get worse with these numbers rising, and we need to remember that, the working conditions that the parents are in are the working conditions of the kids. And we don't want the kids sick, and we don't want the employees sick.
Thank you, Jamie. Marcus Goodson.
Thank you. I missed the meeting last week, and so if this comment has already been covered, I apologize. But has the district taken into consideration purchasing the temperature guns and having those available at each of the schools. As students walk in, you take their temperature, and I know it's not 100% reliable, but I think it is fairly effective. I've been to a couple of places around town, and they check you as soon as you walk in. So again, if that's already been covered, I apologize, but I hadn't heard anyone mention it yet today. And it seems like a fairly straightforward, a simple solution to have to maybe determine some of the kids who may have elevated temperatures, and then they could be rerouted to somewhere in the school and not put with the general student body. That's sort of a question.
Thank you. And yes, it is under consideration, and that is one of the recommendations that will be considered within the subcommittees. So thank you. We're glad you're with us this week. Thanks for
glad to be here.
Glad you were able to be here. I know you had a conflict last week. Okay, our next person is Marshall Bauer. Oh, no way, I'm sorry. That's Samantha Howard.
I won't share anything that's already been shared. We've got a lot of overlap with the high school and the fine arts groups, and Kevin has the details of the high school groups. But one of the things that was interesting that came up today, we had a testing coordinator that was present in our high school group, and she brought up some of her concerns about how long it takes some schools to do retakes, and if we don't have updates from the state on their expectations for state tests and retakes, how are we going to make sure that those schools, if we go into hybrid models, have time to get all of those students in?
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, just a quick aside that if you are not keeping track of the chat, there was a question from Mr. Daley in there about technology, and Mr. Davis has responded to that. So when you get a chance, be sure and check out that chat. Okay, and then our next comment is Scott Hertz is up again. Thank you.
I'm going to make this comment in the fact that in my day job, when I'm not working for the DAC committee, I'm an attorney by trade. Saying that, I feel compelled to give a disclaimer that I am not the school board's attorney. I have no official affiliation with the school board, and this is not professional opinion advice for the school board. But in terms of the concerns raised by Mr. Daley, I first thought about this as we talked about this and about waivers, and I have been asked by some folks about athletic participants, theater, drama. My children participate in Odyssey of the Mind and these types of extracurricular activities where social distancing is almost impossible to actually accomplish the role of those activities. And I thought about the possibility of waivers, but I will tell you that in my career, what I've seen, the challenge that anyone suing the school district claiming that they contracted COVID-19 or some type of respiratory illness while in the school, it's extraordinarily difficult. In America, anyone can sue anybody for anything is what I tell my clients, but proving that that's the location in which you contracted or the person who contracted the disease, proving that they contracted it in the school as a result of these activities or their employment is extraordinarily difficult when this disease is at this point prevalent throughout the country. It would be very difficult to prove that you contracted it in the school as opposed to at the grocery store or in a restaurant or in some other location, including your home. So in terms of waivers, I've not seen, specifically about the district requiring waivers and thoughts of that, but to some degree, I don't know that it's necessary or that the likelihood of someone having a successful suit, also given the sovereign immunity that the school board has and the limitations and the cost of bringing such a suit in terms of medical experts and other professionals that testify, I think it becomes very difficult for someone to prosecute a suit successfully against the district for contracting a respiratory illness like that. Again, all that said with the disclaimer that it's just my opinion. It's not actual professional advice. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a little break with no new people up there. So Dr. Atkins, I'm going to go to you for some comments, please.
Thank you, Sandy. I'll just be real brief. When it comes to a lot of these things, what our team has done is really done a lot of what I think is fairly comprehensive work on developing kind of a draft plan. But what that will do is to give our subcommittees, I think, a really good basis for which you guys can do your work, because I've literally asked them to go from, as I said before, the beginning of the school day right to the end, and think about all of the little things that go on in the course of a school day, in a student's life and a staff member's life. So from the moment that you're on a bus to the moment you get out of that bus and enter the school cafeteria, all of those type of things, including the temperature checks and all of that. So you get, and you'll see this when Dr. Spiro and his team gives their presentation. He's just giving you a brief overview, but when you really get in the weeds on this, which is where we're going to definitely have to get with the subcommittees, you're going to find there's just thousands of little decisions that we need to make in the course of all of this as we prepare. So I do thank you and appreciate all the comments, because that helps us try to think of everything as we put our plan together.
Thank you, Dr. Atkins. I see Mr. Kemp Otero has another comment. Joe.
So a lot of teachers have concerns about the hybrid model, and it's kind of what Kevin talked about earlier with the broadband, and any internet issues, students being responsible and getting on at the time a teacher does a live lesson. So a question that's come up a few times, speaking with other teachers, with regard to the hybrid model, instead of streaming, let's say, a live lesson simultaneously with your classroom instruction, would teachers perhaps have the flexibility of pre-recording their lesson, the content, and students watching a pre-recorded lesson on their virtual days, and then when they come into school, is to follow up in the application of knowledge. And I have a feeling that's probably going to be discussed in the subcommittee, but that is something that teachers are very curious about.
Thank you, Joe. Dr. Saunders is our next speaker. Dr. Saunders, are you there? Dr. Saunders appears to still be muted, and I can't tell.
Hello, can you hear me?
There you go. Now we can hear you. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have two phones here. So, yes, thank you everyone for all your wonderful comments and the concerns regarding children and teachers and maintaining their safety. And I know it's hard to wrap our heads around how can we actually keep everyone safe.
Excuse me, Dr. Saunders. We're just having difficulty hearing you. If you could either speak up or turn up your speaker a little bit.
Yes. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So as I was saying, the CDC does have, some basic guidelines for how to keep students and teachers safe as you return to school. And I know you all have been struggling with the thoughts of how do we distance and how do we maintain things like placing masks on students or having students wear their masks. But some of the main things that you need to think about, is even one of your callers brought up, is how do we make interventions even before the children enter the building? So some of those interventions would be, taking their temperatures, making sure that they wash their hands with a hand sanitizer before they even enter the building, having someone laying eyes on that child to make sure that they don't look sick, that they're not coughing, that they don't have a runny nose. I know we all rely on parents to, kind of make those judgments before their kids come in, but sometimes, kids can get sick pretty quick, and parents during the rush of the day don't always recognize it. So doing those mitigations very early as the child enters into your classroom. And then during the course of the day when the kids are in their classroom, having that frequent hand washing, making sure that they do stay in their seats, that they're may not be able to completely socially distance by that six feet, but maintaining their desk at a distancing that you can keep them as appropriately spaced as you could. And then also during the day, taking the time breaks to clean off their desk. And again, when they're going to new areas into the school facility, having them wash their hands and having those areas cleaned. So those are all things that you can do to mitigate and still, I think, maintain a very safe environment for children as they return to school. Additionally, looking at other things such as taking extended breaks during the holiday season where we may be in the height of viral respiratory season. January and February are very significant times for us, especially in January when kids are returning back to school from being on long holiday, where we see an increase in respiratory viruses. So maybe extending that holiday time to include the height of respiratory viral season, including it into January. And then the other things will come into place, encouraging flu vaccination to mitigate against influenza and co-infections with other viral infections. And emphasizing to parents how important it is that they do keep their children home and that they maintain them at home until they're free of symptoms for 72 hours. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saunders. We appreciate the input from our health community. I do not see any additional hands raised. Does anyone else have any questions or discussion that you want to bring forward before we move into the presentation? No, it doesn't look like it. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen just a moment here. When my PowerPoint catches up with my screen here in just a second, I want to talk about some of the things that have happened since our last meeting. And you heard Dr. Atkins discuss a little bit of this. There has been a lot of time spent on really looking in depth and in detail at every aspect of the students and the teachers' day. So we really have a comprehensive plan that's in the process of being developed. The finalization of that will take into account the feedback from our subcommittees over the next week. But we're looking at the areas of workforce. What is that going to, how is it going to impact the day-to-day planning and work of our teachers and our district staff, our paras, all of our workforce, our bus drivers, looking at what will the impact be on our parents and students, looking at those health and safety considerations that there's been a lot of discussion around tonight. So, what are we really, where do we draw the line as to, we are sure that we need this and maybe we need this. So we're really looking for input on that. The instructional models, which one is best going to fit the needs of the students and the teachers of our district? And then how do we go about communicating all of that out to everyone so that we're sure that there is a clear understanding throughout our community of how we're going to move forward with this reopening. So to give you a little bit of information about that, we're going to talk about what does it look like in the day of a life in the reopening of schools. And this discussion is just around some major areas. And please remember, no decisions have been made at this time. So these are some things that you want to be thinking about so that when we do get into those subcommittees over the next week, that you can really hone in on these areas and say, this is our recommendation for how we do health checks. This is our recommendation for how we have transportation to and from our schools. This is our recommendation for some of the models of instruction for each grade level. So please keep those things in mind as the presentation continues. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Savage, who's going to start with the day in the life of arrival at school. Dr. Savage.
Actually, Cindy, you got to go back when it's a transportation slide.
Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped here.
Yep.
Thank you. Well, there we go. Getting to school.
There you
are.
Dr. Savage.
Yes, and I really want to kind of echo something that Dr. Saunders had mentioned already, which is, you know, kind of, and it's a key feature of the plan that the governor put out, which one of the subsets in the Florida Department of Ed was winning the day and winning each phase of the day. Well, the day for us begins before the student even arrives at the campus, and so, you know, the first steps before they even get to the bus stop would be, has the parent intervened in a way that is consistent with the policies that we put forward as recommended? So things such as, is the parent taking the child's temperature before they even leave the house? You know, that's a piece that even precedes before the parent walks the child to the bus stop. And this is where these options will be expanded upon in our subcommittee when we actually get to this point. So once the child steps onto the bus, what will the child see? Will the child see a fairly empty bus that's under the full 6 feet of separation guidelines with the CDC, or as the state of Florida plan acknowledged that may not really be feasible, that the full 6 feet of social distancing, while that is the ideal scenario, that in cases where that is really not feasible, then what happens? Well, that means it could be any variation where it's 1 student per seat. It could be 2 students in a seat skipping rows. It could be a number of different things. And those various options will be brought to the subcommittee to review and bring back a recommendation for that piece. Whether it's a fairly empty bus or whether it's a full bus with students wearing protective cloth coverings or masks and so forth to help offset the fact that they wouldn't have the full 6 feet of separation. They may have fewer feet of separation, so those protective measures. Again, another key decision that will have to be recommended is, are masks strongly recommended or are they required? Certainly some districts are erring on the side of just strongly recommending and making them widely available, but not necessarily going to the full extent of actually requiring the masks, but others are requiring them. So, you know, that's a key decision that we will have to evaluate on that task force. That's not just for buses, but just in general, but specifically on buses, because it is an area that doesn't lend itself to social distancing to the level of what we would love to be able to do. Last but not least, in that particular bus trip, the role of hand sanitizer. Are students carrying personal hand sanitizer so that you're minimizing any touching of these particular surfaces, making sure that students have that and can carry it with them on their person, in their bags, as they often do. Most of our school supply lists across the district have had hand sanitizer as an ask for students to bring, in addition to potential consideration of other dispensers and things of that nature to try to systematically increase the probability that sanitizer will be present. Now, one measure that we did have a recommendation already at this point was not to necessarily take temperatures upon entry to the bus. Some districts will consider taking bus temperatures at the bus, and others do not, strictly because of what happens if a student, a young child in particular, a kindergartner, first grader, second grader, is screened and unfortunately has been standing out in the sun and is over 100, and do they leave the child there? You know, that where there's no parent there, and thus creating other safety concerns if a parent isn't at the bus stop. And so for us, the recommendation was that we begin that screening process, that temperature screening. We ask, make it as an expectation for parents to do that at home, but that once students then do arrive on campus, we have clear measures in place for temperature screening as well as quarantining of students who fail those guidelines. Again, trying to win the day so that before students have a chance to come into significant contact with other students, that they are able to be rerouted once they would arrive on a campus where they could be safely quarantined until they are picked up by a family. So those are just some of the unique considerations when a child is starting and getting to the school campus. So we'll go ahead and advance to the next slide.
Thank you, Dr. Savage. And so, as Dr. Savage said, then students arrive at school. And so part of the considerations, and again, Cindy talked about this and Ken did as well, these are all considerations we're looking at as we make a comprehensive plan to help our staff, our students, our parents, and our community as a whole understand what the expectations are. So when students arrive at school, even before they get into the building, do we do a temperature check, as was mentioned earlier, or do we do the verbal health screenings that are also available? If we say masks are required, well then if a student doesn't have a mask, what will be the protocol to provide a mask for him or her? If they're not required and students are coming to school with a mask on, how do we make sure that they are actually properly wearing them before they even enter the building? And then as students arrive and they get into the building, what are we doing with breakfast? We are working with our food service team on that. Will it be a grab and go breakfast, where as students come in, they grab their breakfast and they go right into their classroom? Or is it where they'll go to the cafeteria and where there'll be some social distancing available? Those are decisions we have to make. Of course, all the plans talk about having one-way traffic in the hallways. Well, as students are coming into the building, obviously they're going to have staggered entrances into the building. We're going to have to make sure buses aren't all released at one time. We're going to have to make sure that parent pickup is also where students all don't leave parent pickup all at one time, to make sure that we don't have the entire student body trying to get through those doors. And so those are going to be some plans that schools are going to have to work with on in their own unique building. How do they make that happen? So those are large considerations. And then, of course, late arriving kids. So what would the process be for after students are in class? What would the process be for students who arrive late? So that's the arrival pieces that we're looking at your input on, making sure that everybody has a plan in place. And so I saw a question just popped up. Right, so one of the considerations is what happens if we do a temperature check and the student has the fever? You know, how do they get to the isolation room? Where is the isolation room? What is the protocol that's in place for that? All of those are pieces that we're working with our health professionals to help create those guidelines. Cindy, next slide. Thank you. And then we have to think about during the course of the day. School's a very busy place throughout the course of the day. What are we doing with visitors? Are we allowing visitors on campus? Are we not allowing visitors on campus? Are we limiting the visitors on campus? When students have their IEP, their individual education plan meetings that are hand in hand with the student and the parent, how will those look? Will those be done virtually? Will those be done face-to-face? Will those be done via social distancing? Parent conferences. Will parent conferences be now using a protocol like a Zoom or a Meet? Are they over the phone, or are we having them in person and we're doing social distancing with them? We also have contracted services. You know, we have a lot of people from the outside that support our students. Speech pathologists, mental health counselors, DCF comes on campus. There are all sorts of agencies that come on campus. How do we handle those? Deliveries, we think about cafeteria food deliveries. Think about the U.S. mail that comes on campus. Would we have vending machines? Would we not have vending machines? And if we have vending machines, how do we screen the people that come in and fill the machines? And so those are all specific protocols that we would have to have in line. A good question I saw popping up would be, what about masks? Who supplies those masks, right? Is the district supplying all those if we require masks, or are those supplied by the families? Those are decisions that we make with our business services team and this task force and the subcommittee as well. Cindy, you want to hit the next slide? So then it's the day in the life of the classroom, and this is where a lot of the questions come up. And so I too have been reading all the comments. I too have been working with a large team where we've literally have been vetting all those comments to see how can we include all these into our plans. And so whatever model we look at, you know, if we are doing a K-5 plan or whatever that looks like with that subcommittee, you know, will kids stay in cohorts, or will we allow them to mix. If we do a 6 to 12 plan, no matter what that schedule looks like, are we going to try to group those classes together to limit movement in the hallway? So for example, in middle school, do we try to bring those teams together so those grade level teams are together? Do we, for high school, try to have 9th grade classes in one part of the building, 10th grade classes in another part of the building? Those are considerations that are being discussed. A lot of conversation about social distancing. So I heard Joe talk earlier. Are we moving file cabinets out, right? Are we moving teacher desks out? So if we were able to remove all of the unnecessary furniture in the classroom and arrange the furniture the best that we could to have students social distance, could we do the 6 feet? Or do we go with what the state's saying is 6 feet if possible? Those are considerations that we have. And then what does that look like for kids? All right, is everybody turned around, facing forward? I know that I keep saying to my team, this is heartbreaking sometimes because it's like we're undoing some of our best instructional strategies, right? We want to engage students. We want to get them to work in small groups. So that's the nature of a school building. But when we have this new reality, how do we make that work? So are there some other tools that we can use? And we have our curriculum team that's working on some components of that we'll be putting into that comprehensive plan. What's going to be the process for materials? If we're talking about kids not sharing materials, how do we make sure that they bring their own, how do they make sure that we bring their own materials and keep them with them? In elementary school, I know kids have their own cubby. And so do we allow kids to go to their cubby to put their items in there, or are students bringing those and keeping them at their own desks? And we know oftentimes that can become very overwhelming, especially in elementary, because kids could have a lot of items at the desk. Middle and high school, the kids take their backpacks, they don't put them in the front of the room, they keep them with them. And where do they keep them with them so that we make sure that those items aren't shared with other students? How do we handle ESC? Our services, our therapies, our evaluations, all of those pieces. We have our ESC team and our student services team. They've been working on that, trying to come up with protocols and procedures that we're going to have in this draft plan for everybody to look at. PE, recess, and arts, really big. So how do we make sure that all of those are accessible to our children? I heard Mr. Hertz talk earlier. How do we meet the requirement for PE? How do we meet the requirement for recess? Those are all ideas that are being flushed out right now that we're trying to put into our plan to make sure we meet the needs of kids. And of course, media center materials. Having access to books. How do teachers have access to books? How are we doing electives? How are we doing specials? And so all of those are considerations that we're going to be putting in our plan that our subcommittee is going to help us make some final decisions on. And I do think what's important, mentioned earlier, part of the plan I know that we have in there is before students enter a classroom, we do a hand sanitizer, and then again after they exit the class, they either wash their hands or do the hand sanitizer again. Throughout the plan, I know there are a lot of themes about properly washing hands, continuing to teach students how to properly wash hands, access to hand sanitizer as well. That is a common theme throughout the plan, and you'll see there are multiple areas on the campus that we're talking about having hand sanitizers available. Cindy, you want to go ahead? And Jamie, I saw your question about plexiglass. We're going to talk about that soon. So then we have lunch. So how are we going to do lunch? Are our kids going to come down and we're going to social distance in the cafeteria if possible, or are we going to go back and eat in our classrooms? And if we eat in our classrooms, since we don't want students to pass, how are we doing one-way directionals? How are we cleaning the keypads after students use them and they come through to make sure that we're properly using those? Again, we're working with our food service department and our maintenance team, a lot of cross-divisional conversations. We're having conversations about possibilities. What could this look like as we're doing this? One more, Cindy. Thank you. And then class changes as a whole. Class changes, a lot of movement in the hallway. So we're going to need to have social distance markings on the floors. Not throughout the hallways, but in key areas. So for example, in the restrooms. If we are using water fountains, or how we're using water fountains, to have social distance markings on the floor. Do we do staggered class changes to make sure that students aren't interacting? Hence why we talked earlier about, do we group kids together to limit that movement in the hallway? How do we make sure that there are directional signs for one-way traffic? Where will all that hand sanitizer be in the common areas? Are they going to be just at the main entrance? Are they going to be by elevators? Are they going to be by high traffic areas? Those are all decisions we have to make. And then what's going to be the access to the restrooms? How are we going to make sure that the restrooms are cleaned on a regular basis? How are we going to make sure that kids make sure that they social distance in the restrooms? That's a challenge. Anybody who's worked in a school, that would be a challenge. And so those are protocols that the team is working on as well. And then the dismissal. We have dismissal of school. So anybody who's been in the school, the bell rings and, we have parent pickup, we have bike riders, we have walkers, we have bus riders. Well, it's going to have to be a staggered approach to make sure that there's allowed to have social distancing. And then what would be the process as well for kids who sign out? So if kids are coming to get picked up from their parents, how do we do that? How do we make sure that, they have some screening as well? Do parents, what is the process going to be? And so we're working on protocols for all of those so that there's no guessing games for everybody, that everybody has a firm understanding of what that looks like. And then, of course, before and after school care. So part of the conversation that we're having is how do parents come and sign their kids in? What does before care look like? What does after care look like? How do parents pick their child up? So we're really delving into that as well. We're going to continue to need to have the feedback of this task force, make sure we're not missing anything with before and after school care. That's a huge piece. And then, of course, activities. After school intramurals, after school activities, after school clubs, after school athletics. How do we make sure that kids are safe if we do that? Do we have them? Do we have the clubs? Do we not have clubs? Do we have intramurals? Do we not have intramurals? Those are decisions we need to make. If we're using locker rooms, what does that look like? Do we have social distance markings on the floor in the locker rooms? What's the cleaning process look like for locker rooms as well? So all of those need to be clearly spelled out for our community and for our schools, again, so that everybody understands what the plan is and it's very clear for everybody. A big portion of the plan that has been a lot of time, and Beth Whiff has been leading this with us, and I know she's working with our local health officials from Department of Health and also Lee Health. We're talking about how are we monitoring for symptoms? How are we going to handle various cases, suspected cases, presumptive cases, confirmed cases? What does that look like in the school? What are the suggestions for PPE, that personal protective equipment? What are the health professionals' recommendations for those as well? And that's a large part of our conversation has been around those healthy decision making so that we can focus in on the academics as well. And then Ken's going to talk to us just a little bit about the cleaning and sanitizing piece. Dr. Savage.
Thank you, Dr. Sparrow. It's one of the least controversial aspects of any of these plans really has to do with an increased effort in cleaning and sanitizing. So vital to win all of those other aspects of the day. And one of the things that our maintenance team has put forward is a recommendation to change our custodial hours. So currently most of our custodians report and clean, do a lot of the cleaning and the trash pickup of surfaces all at night. And while there are some daytime custodians, typically most of them currently. So one recommendation we have is to change and shift this to increase the amount of personnel we have that are properly trained for the dramatic increased level of surface cleaning that would happen throughout the day. So instead of it being an end of day activity, it's really an ongoing thing throughout the day, utilizing the appropriate chemicals as well as allowing for the appropriate level of flash time to have a maximum impact in mitigating the potential for the virus and infection. This includes all high frequency cleaning of all of our touch surfaces throughout the student day. And so that's something we've put in this kind of data like these are happening the entire day. Additionally, just because I didn't mention it from the bus standpoint early, one of the things we didn't say that the student would not see it, but it would happen immediately after the students vacate the bus. After each route, the bus drivers would also be deploying the appropriate cleaning material to all of the surfaces within the bus as well. So you're just getting that increased vigilance around, between students accessing the different materials. And so that same thing applies in the schoolhouse. Now, I have the special privilege of actually having one of our key maintenance experts here on staff, Mr. Jimmy Thompson, who's going to speak to you about the next piece of our cleaning and sanitizing efforts, specifically something that isn't necessarily talked about in great length and great detail in some of the other plans, but is a tremendous opportunity to address, to leverage some of our existing approach in schoolhouses in terms of our HVAC systems and our monitoring of the air quality to really have a maximum to even enhance that standard to really provide an additional benefit for our students. So, Mr. Thompson, are you available to jump in?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Coming through loud and clear. Thank you.
You're welcome. So what we've done here in maintenance is we've taken the equipment that we have on site at all the schools, which is top of the line, high quality, and we started monitoring CO2, planning to go back at full capacity. We figure if we plan for worst case scenario, our best case scenario for all of us, we go back at 100%, we'll be ready. If we go back partial, we'll be 100%. So what we did was we started monitoring CO2, that's carbon dioxide. That helps us get a great idea of how much fresh air we're bringing into the buildings. All of our buildings are regulated by an ASHRAE standard. ASHRAE standard is basically a governing body that governs commercial buildings. ASHRAE recommends we bring in 10 CFM of fresh air from the outside to the inside. That keeps our buildings sealed and balanced, and it also gets rid of the return air that we're breathing in, that the kids are exhaling whatever contaminants, whether it be a virus, the flu, whatever they have. So that CFM that we're bringing in allows us to regulate our buildings so the doors don't blow open or the doors don't get stuck closed, and we allow for the proper amount of air exchanges. So which in a classroom is 6 to 20 air exchanges per hour is what they recommend. So far, we have 41% of the district has been tested. We've identified any areas that might have issues as far as dampers being open. Dampers allow the fresh air to come in and allow us to release some of the return air back out into the atmosphere. We're looking very, very good right now with our CO2 monitoring. By testing with our CO2, we're testing roughly 40% of the school. The schools are unloaded at this point. However, we take a sample study of outside. For example, Bonita Springs Elementary School, where it was tested prior to the roof collapse, and the outside carbon dioxide was 418 parts per million. Inside, we never increased in an occupied reception area at 521 parts per million. The ASHRAE, we govern it anything over 700 parts per million above the outside, we would get alarmed. So we're well in the range there of fresh air. The reason for fresh air being so important to us and to everyone else is that India, Italy, they've all done studies that I've read talking about and discussing particulate matter carrying the COVID virus. So you exhale, you're depleting the room of oxygen, you replace it with carbon dioxide, but you also are leaving whatever virus or whatever issues you may have on that particulate matter that then travels through the air, which we have to exhaust through the building. So what we're doing is we're then increasing our filter changeouts from quarterly to monthly. What that's going to do is that's going to allow us to have much cleaner air for the kids to breathe. And we're increasing our filter media from a MERV 8, which is a very high standard, that's what we use across the district, to a MERV 9 with dust lock, meaning that particulate I discussed that could carry the virus, it could carry a multitude of different things, as well as an irritant for people that are prone to allergies or anybody that's hypersensitive. So it's going to get clung to that dust lock and that filter, and that MERV 9 is going to stay there. We've increased our coil cleanings. So when the kids go back, or if they go back, 100% of the coils have been cleaned, 100% of the filters have been changed. We know we're bringing enough fresh air for the kids. We've increased our filter change-out program. We're looking into UV lighting. We all know that it works well. We've read all the studies. The main issue here is cost, and it's going to drive all of us. I saw a question about MERV 11. Yes, it does. Home air conditioning systems do offer MERV 11 filters. However, the issue with that is the static dust pressure on it. Our systems could ice up because of the amount of occupants that are in the building. So MERV 9 is about as high as we can go in a commercial building with dust lock. We're looking into UV lighting into the ductwork. We're going to have a price for UV lighting in the ductwork across the district. We should have that within the next week. We'll propose the price. We'll give you guys the pros, the cons, and we can make a decision as a group. But with the air exchanges, CO2 monitoring, monthly air filters, and UV lighting, I think we've gone above and beyond. There's also some discussion about the gyms, the locker rooms, the mats inside the wrestling areas. All those will be 100% sanitized by the time school starts. Whether we use them or we don't use them, they will be ready for school to start. We were able to secure a couple thousand gallons of the product that we're using to fog, which is registered with the CDC to kill the COVID-19 virus. So I believe we're way ahead of the curve in everything that we have going on. We'll be continuing to monitor these meetings and attend, and any questions you guys may have, we'll address them at any time.
And Jimmy, I just want to thank you, number one, for attending, but also there was another question in the chat, actually from our esteemed board member who chairs this group, which is Ms. Vaughn, and she specifically asked, do we have adequate trained personnel in-house to monitor the indoor air quality? So if you want to talk about just how they're monitoring the air exchange, to just kind of briefly summarize what you just said about how that air exchange will be monitored, as well as just in general any indoor air quality monitoring in terms of credentials and the process around that.
Yes, sir. I am a licensed mold assessor by the state of Florida. I'm licensed in asbestos, I'm licensed in mercury, and I'm licensed in lead. The assistant that works under me is a licensed general contractor. He's licensed as an assessor. He's licensed as a remediator. He's working on his lead certification now. We're also ramping up some of our employees that we have in-house. We're training them on the proper usage of PPE. We've secured multiple foggers, and we're getting them sitting on ready to go so we can utilize them to fog schools in the event we have a case positive situation. So instead of relying on anything, we'll be able to do nightly fogging in the schools and the classrooms in the areas where we have issues, and also prior to it becoming an issue as a preventative maintenance measure, we'll be able to fog utilizing our employees in the classrooms and in the schools nightly to prevent any issues from coming up and making sure that everyone knows that they're safe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. I greatly appreciate your presence here today.
Thank you guys very much for everything. If you have any questions, we're here at any time.
Dr. Savage, anything else from you?
Well, just that any of the other basic health measures that were being under evaluation will certainly be adequately explored in terms of what the proposals are, the different considerations for price, the different considerations of how many of the different artifacts and things that would be deployed will be discussed in the breakout sessions so that people can have, I guess with one of the earlier comments about plexiglass, would plexiglass be deployed in the reception areas? Would it be deployed at teachers' desks? Would it be deployed at small group stations? All those things would be fully vetted at the subcommittee level, just so they have a chance to get into the greater level of detail on that type of proposal. So that, I hope that answers the question there.
It does. Thank you, Dr. Savage. So in addition to, since our last meeting, we've been working on all of those different protocols that we just went through. We're trying to create a comprehensive guide for our community. But there have also been additional key considerations that we've been working on simultaneously. So in addition to working out the details of these processes and procedures, there are other also large buckets that we have been focusing our attention on. Cindy? So the first one is, we talked about, Dr. Atkins talked about this in his opening as well. We're also working on what are we going to do when students return academically as well. And right off the bat, we're going to talk about what are we doing for coping and being resilient? What's our plan for students and staff? And so I know our student services team has been working on that. How are we going to make sure that we deal with the issues that our students have been dealing with and our staff have been dealing with? Last time we talked, I talked to you about trauma-informed decision-making, as part of the pieces that we're working on. So we're focused on the whole child. We also have a team looking at, can we do expanded learning opportunities, especially as we continue to focus on reducing the various achievement gaps that we have. How do we make sure that our students get caught up if they're behind at all with any credit retrieval? What are we going to use as our baseline assessments when students come back to see where they currently are? Remember, last time that we saw our students with any type of assessment to measure their learning was during the third quarter. And so we need to see, where they are so that we can help them move forward. And then, kind of going back to what Joe talked about, how are we going to gauge students with this new reality of where we are with what school may or may not look like when we return back into the fall? So educationally, those are some of the big buckets that we're looking at, trying to put some effort in to make sure that we can support our teachers and our students when they return. Cindy.
Hi, everyone. This is Angela Pruitt. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the workforce plan and some of the considerations and the important pieces of information. First and foremost, our goal is going to continue to work with our unions, with TALC and SPALC, and the memberships of those groups, as well as our other stakeholders, to really discuss all aspects of this plan. As you can imagine, some of our decisions relative to workforce are going to be very dependent upon the bigger decisions that are made relative to what it's going to look like in the fall. But we definitely are working on implementing a phased approach, which we have already been doing that relative to some of our work groups and working with them and making sure that we're communicating appropriately and letting them know what options those employees have. We're going to work closely with preparing the workplace for the employees as they return and begin to do their job functions, and then making sure that we're implementing the safety protocols and lots of things that we've already discussed here this afternoon and that we discussed last week. But really, it's going to be very, very important that we're addressing the needs of employees. And that can look like a lot of different things, but it's going to be important, and we're going to provide instructions and coaching to our administrators as we begin to make some final decisions on what things are going to look like and what that in turn means for our employee work groups. And we're going to make sure that we're not losing sight of our mental health and wellness concerns, because, this, as we've said repeatedly, is unprecedented times. It's a very, like I think I've said before, they say we're all in the same storm, but we're all in different ships. And so, again, being cognizant of that and making sure that we're not, losing sight of things as a result of that. Communication and training are going to be a critical piece of this workforce plan and rolling out in support of the bigger decisions that are made relative to the reopening plan. And then, as it was mentioned earlier, we're going to have to be flexible due to the evolving recommendations. Where we are today may not be where we are a week from now. But so these are some of the broad strokes of what we're looking at relative to the workforce plan. And I'm looking forward to working with some of you in the subcommittee as we begin to work through this and make some decisions. Thank you.
Hi, this is Irma Lancaster, Director of Communications. I'm going to share with you some information we've been working on. Our main goal really is to ensure that the information that we are sharing internally and externally is coming from reliable sources such as the CDC and the Florida Department of Health. So we'll encourage our families and our staff, as they're researching information on prevention, that they are seeking reliable sources. We do have a page on our website that we created specifically to keep all our stakeholders informed of the latest information, both on the school reintroduction plan as well as prevention. That is on your screen, theschools.net/school_reintroduction. That also links to our COVID-19 page, which we created when we first implemented our closures to continue to keep our families informed. And there's a lot of prevention information available there as well. We want to make sure that we keep in regular communication with all our stakeholders. And I forgot to apologize for the small font, but the communications team wanted me to make sure that we shared a lot of information with you. So I apologize for the tiny font. But we did want you all to be aware that we have a lot of avenues that we are going to maximize to ensure that we reach everyone that needs the information as we're developing our reopening plans, because there's a lot that they're going to have to know, as they prepare to return and when they return, both internally and externally. So right now we do have our situational report that comes out of the superintendent's office. Right now it's coming out weekly. It used to come out daily, and we will increase frequency as needed. That is for our employees, keeping them informed of all decisions and plans that are made on behalf of the district. And as those plans are developed, we will have trainings with our principals and our district leadership teams, and they will share with their staff. So that everyone is well prepared for what those plans will be. We'll be maximizing our digital platform economy. In addition to our website, we have all our social media channels, our community flyers, PR that are delivered via email to our families and our staff. We have our school messenger communication system, and that shares information to both our families and staff via email, text, or phone call, voicemail message. We have a podcast that is hosted by one of our communications team members that we're hoping to have the superintendent on once the reopening plans are developed, so we can have a more conversational, informational tool to share with our families. We do have the reopening schools email that you're all aware of, that we've been consistently receiving inquiries from, not just the public, but also many of our staff, and our surveys. In addition to the initial surveys that we put out, we would like to do follow-up surveys maybe once the reopening plans are in place to see how those are working, in addition to maybe possible additional surveys. We will maximize our media partnerships to help tell our stories as far as what school will look like. So we'll invite some of our media to come to our schools, maybe show, before students arrive, what will a classroom look like? What could a hallway look like? Some of the things that Dr. Spire was referring to, so we can visually see, so families and staff know what to expect when they arrive. We'll maximize some of our outreach with our Spanish media, as we know that sometimes it's a little more challenging to reach our Spanish-speaking families, so we'll be doing a lot of that. We've also been working diligently to further develop our existing community partnerships. We have our coordinator of community engagement, Adam Malloy, is also on the task force, and he is in this meeting. And we've been working to develop contacts with our PTAs, faith-based organizations, nonprofits, elected officials, just any partnerships that can help us continue to get information out to our families, so that when we do have our reopening plans developed, we are using every avenue possible. We will be creating COVID-19 prevention messages and materials. This includes one sheet type where you'll have more brief summarized information as well as videos for our families. We know the reopening plan can be quite comprehensive, so we want to create a kind of a one-stop shop where parents and families can see information that isn't so complicated. Just tell me the basics. So that's something that we're working on as far as developing one sheets that could be not just posted online, but also maybe shared at events if we're invited to events, as different communities maybe start participating in those as we're reopening the community. We also have created them before we closed in March, but we have stop at the door signage that we've created, so that, once we decide if we're going to have visitors, and even if we do, even for employees, stop at the door, do you have any of these symptoms? If you do, maybe you need to reevaluate if you should be entering the building. We also have, basic information on what is, COVID-19, and as well as prevention materials from the CDC that include things such as, how to properly hand wash, cover your cough, stay home when you're sick, etc. We're also working to create a reopening schools toolkit, which is based on the reopening plan that will be developed by this task force. This will be inclusive of a communications plan. If someone were to become ill and if school closures are necessary, how do we let our families know in our community as necessary? I think that was a question earlier on, and that is something that is currently being developed. So as I mentioned, Adam Malloy is in this meeting as well, so we're happy to answer any questions that may come up related to this, and we look forward to working with some of you in the communications subcommittee. Cindy?
Cindy, you need to unmute.
Yep. So sorry. So thank you, Irma. And my comment was, are your heads spinning yet? Because when you hear all that information, you see just what a huge task this is. And there has been so much work going into this plan for the reopening of schools already. And we are really looking forward to having you go to work on it as well. You've done a great job of going out and gathering input from your community and from your friends and from your coworkers. And so now the subcommittee work will be to take that information that you have gathered, to think about this plan that has been being worked on, and then to go to work on one specific area of that over the next week. So the expectation is that the subcommittees will meet at least once between now and next week in your specific area. All of those items that were mentioned today and any others that come up within that week, be thinking about those, and then come back next week with a recommendation to the full committee around your whole area. So what are your recommendations in terms of transportation? What are your recommendations in terms of those health precautions as we move forward? What are the recommendations around the workforce? So we have 17 people who had responded by 3 o'clock this afternoon to the subcommittee survey. So I'm going to put those up. When you see the names, please know that everyone had one of their top 3 choices. And we tried to look at some diversity across the committees in terms of role. So we tried to have parents on different committees, to have our students on different committees, to have community members on different committees, so that we had a broad representation across those subcommittees. If you had not yet responded to the survey, but do wish to participate on a committee, please do that. The survey link is still open, and so we will add these. Also know that district staff will be added to these subcommittees based upon their areas of expertise, so they will be meeting with you as well. So hopefully you can all see that. But, you'll notice that their numbers aren't exactly equal across, and that's okay. We do seem to have good representation in terms of our groups across the committees. Okay, before we go on with that, is there anyone who has a question about your subcommittee assignment or the work that needs to be done within that subcommittee? Okay, I do not see any hands. So again, you'll have this available. We'll send out the list of everyone and add people who respond to the survey later. But this is our beginning groups. And as you can hear tonight, you have your work cut out for you. So what are the next steps? Well, within the next week, you'll have a subcommittee meeting, at least one, and some of you may realize that you need to have more than one. And next week, you will come back with a recommendation to the full committee around your area. And that meeting will be next week, next Wednesday at 4 o'clock again. Then the team from the district will take that feedback and those recommendations. We'll also consider recommendations that are currently being made through our board advisory committees, and also recommendations and questions that are coming in through the Reopening Schools email. So all of that information, along with the recommendations of our health department and the CDC, taking in consideration the governor's plan, all of those recommendations will be considered, and then the team plans to have a recommendation to go forward to the board in early July. So it's a quick timeline, and we realize that there's a lot of work to be done in that amount of time. However, we feel it's really important to have some decisions made so that our principals and our teachers know what the expectations are, so that we can get any changes that need to be made in terms of the buildings themselves, in terms of furniture and getting things in place, that can be done in time to open on schedule, because we are committed to bringing our students back, adhering to that published instructional calendar that's out there right now. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. And that is the end of our agenda for today. But I would like to give Mrs. Vaughn and Dr. Atkins a chance if they would like to make any final comments. Mrs. Vaughn, we haven't heard from you this evening. Is there anything that you would like to bring up?
I just would like to say thank you to staff for working so hard, and to all of you wonderful people who are giving of your time. Cindy, I'm going to assume that whoever the staff liaison is to each of these committees will be contacting us within, what, like 24 hours and sending the Zoom invitations?
Yes, ma'am. They'll be in contact. We'll give people till probably noon tomorrow to respond to that survey and to get those final assignments made, and also to get the district staff assigned. but by the end of day tomorrow, they will have made contact.
Great, that's what I was figuring, but just wanted to make sure that was clear. So again, thank you, and we have some homework, so I think we can handle it. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Atkins.
Yeah, I just echo what Ms. Vaughn said. I just really appreciate everybody's input. We do have a lot to do, as you can see, but I do really believe we've got a really good team here on this committee and a wonderful staff. So I'm confident we'll be able to make some really high quality recommendations to our board. We also will continue to share different district plans with you. And I will tell you, they are across the board in terms of their complexity and detail. But I will also say that there's also a lot of alignment among the plans. We continue to stay in touch with each other. I'm in touch quite frequently with Collier County. And so, you know, I think we'll be seeing a lot of similarities in what we do. But anyway, again, I just say I really appreciate the work that has been done and that continues to be done. As you know, there's a diversity of opinion out there, so we have to be you know, considerate of all of that as we move forward. But I think ultimately we're going to land in a good place. So thank you. And thank you also, Cindy, for facilitating this evening. Done a wonderful job as always.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Once again, thank you to everyone for the time that you have spent tonight. There is a lot of information. You can see you have a big task ahead of you. And, you know, I'm a plus Delta girl. So if you would please, in your chat box, if you would leave comments as to what worked well for you this evening, what was helpful in terms of understanding the process going forward and the work that needs to be done. And then for the deltas, any changes. You know, delta is a symbol for change. So what do we need to change that could make it better for you next week? And with that, you'll leave your comments, and I'll leave the meeting on for just a couple of minutes so you have time to do that. And once you've done that, please have a wonderful rest of your evening and enjoy the extra, let's see here, 27 minutes of your night that has been given back to you. Thank you again and good night.